A new poll out of Michigan has some extremely good news for Joe Biden. It shows him leading by 16 points up on President Trump in that crucial battleground state, with a specific survey starting the day after that Lafayette Park photo op incident.
That's right. But Team Biden is continuing to battle the perception around his criminal justice record. More than 50 organizations signed a letter to the Democratic candidate asking that he make amends for his record, along with not supporting federally funded community policing programs. Democratic strategist Colin Rogero, he is back, and he joins us now with his perspective on the Biden campaign. Colin, it's great to see you.
We missed you.
Missed you as well. Thank you for having me back. Y'all look great, by the way.
Great, man. We miss you. We love the beard, and your style is great as always. Colin, one of the things we always love getting your perspective on the show was about a candidate and their messaging. So largely, we've seen this interesting dynamic where Biden has not actually taken on all that much messaging and has allowed kind of the news cycle to just take its course. As a Democratic strategist, you make ads and you try to create messages for people. How do you assess the state of the Biden campaign right now?
Here's what I can tell you from the messaging perspective. I think they're still in a largely defensive and do no harm place. And I think, look, they're a little worried about things like what Joe will say. And I think we've just got to get over that. Joe's going to be Joe, and Joe's going to say some things. And the campaign just needs to let people know, look, this is where Joe's heart is, and this is where he's coming from. But we recognize he's not always going to say everything perfect. And, for me, I don't enjoy in any time in a campaign playing defense. And I wish they would get off that and actually start playing offense on stuff like this. We know criminal justice is going to be an issue. We know he's got to talk about his previous voting record. He needs to just get it out of the way. Tell people why he voted this way, what was going on in the country at the time, especially with the crack epidemic that made them think the way they do, and show his personal evolution. The one thing that people will give candidates and anyone in life forgiveness for is making a personal evolution and growing. And he's done that. And I think he just needs to express that and people will understand.
He has in some ways, but in some ways he hasn't. I mean, he did that before George Floyd was murdered. He gave that interview to Charlamagne the God over that at the Breakfast Club. And Charlamagne challenged him on his record on criminal justice reform and was like, look, Hillary Clinton apologized for her support of the 94 crime bill. Do you want to apologize? And he was like, no, she was absolutely wrong to apologize. And here's all the reasons why it was great and why I would basically do it again. So how much has he actually evolved, I guess, is a real open question to me.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it's one the campaign needs to actually publicly and authentically deal with and put out there in the front. Now, how much has he evolved? I can't tell you. I can tell you that I don't know how you all look at your lives, but when I look back at 20 years ago or 30 years ago, 40 years ago, God, that's a long time. I'm actually that old now. These solutions that worked then don't work now. And I can't imagine that people would hold people to public policies that were enacted and passed 30 plus years ago and hold them to a standard of 2020, because policies have to evolve like the country does and like the situation does.
Mm-hmm. Colin, one of the things, too, that you talked about there, you said stop being on the defensive and start going offensive. What would that look like in your view with Biden? Because it seems that so much of what he says, as you say, it's reactive. I was actually just saw this analysis. Joe Biden has not done a press conference in 2.5 months. He has done some television interviews. He's giving a speech today. But his campaign is very tightly and highly controlled, is not taking questions from the press since even the Tara Reade allegation has come out. So how is it that somebody can be offensive in that way if they're not even taking any questions for the press for a sustained period of months?
Yeah, I can't really say what the strategy is behind that. I say that my sense is that probably had a lot to do with the COVID crisis and the fact that Trump was just burning himself alive every day when he would do his own press conferences. And they were like, why should we detract from him lighting himself on fire on a daily basis? And in that instance, I might have advised the same thing. But I think now we're past that and we need to get out talking about who we are, what we are. And I think, look, what that campaign is probably looking at is polling that says we have some advantages in some key areas. And if we don't do anything, we should hold those. However, I think that is a very, very dangerous place to begin a campaign and to operate a campaign. Hillary Clinton certainly started ahead of Donald Trump before, but it didn't end up that way. Polls were ahead for her almost through the entirety of the race, but not in the end when people actually went to the polls. Yeah. I think what it looks like Joe Biden telling his story. A lot of people still don't know Joe Biden aside from the fact that he was the VP to Obama. He needs to talk about who he is, especially in places like the Latino community, where I can tell you from polling that I am seeing that they don't really know anything about him other than that. And he needs to talk to them about who he is and what he believes.
Well, the counterpoint is maybe that's a good thing. I mean, he won the Democratic primary with, frankly, not doing a whole heck of a lot. We covered that poll, and look, I think it's an outlier, but in Michigan, he appears to be up by probably double digits at this point. Philippe Reines was actually making the case. He's doing great. Don't leave the basement. Let's take a listen to that.
I think, if it ain't broke, don't leave the basement. And it's not like he's being lazy. It's not like he doesn't want to meet people. He's being prudent. He's following the advice of medical and professional public health officials. I'm sure he is itching to get back on the trail. Just because Donald Trump wants to go back on the trail this week doesn't mean that that's the correct thing to do. What's most important is what Joe Biden says to the American electorate. And what he is saying seems to be working. Donald Trump probably wants Joe Biden out of the basement because the Joe Biden that's in the basement is beating him pretty resoundingly.
What do you think of that analysis? We also covered here Terry McAuliffe on a Zoom call with a bunch of Norfolk, I think, Democrats here in Virginia, was like, he's in the basement, he's fine, he sees 2 body people a day, that's great. Like, just stay there. What do you think of that approach?
I think I think there's a separation between campaign technique and the public health, adhering to public health advice. And if he's adhering to public health advice and what people are advising him to do from a medical perspective, then that is what he should continue to do. However, I think once we are past that and in campaign mode, it's very dangerous to say at any point in time in a campaign, if it ain't broke, don't come out of the basement, right? Like, the same of anything becomes boring after a while, whether that's, press conferences that are from his basement with the books behind him or from the yard where he switched up to some. I think people just got to see him active and out there. One of the hits against Joe Biden, be it trivial, is that they call him Sleepy Joe and they say, hey, man, he's maybe not mentally all there. You got to go out and show that you are, and not with canned speeches, but actually actively, showing that, being physically active and moving around and being amongst people. And he's got the ability to do that. And when it is physically for him to do it, he should.
Yeah, and last question here, Colin, which is that you were talking about polling in the Latino community. What is it exactly that, because we see the same thing as one of his biggest deficits relative to Hillary Clinton. What do you think that is owed to? What is it exactly that he has such a deficit amongst them?
Well, look, so I think it is really just an informational deficit. I think a lot of people just don't know anything about Joe Biden. They don't know, that he's a family guy. They don't know his story growing up. They don't know that he spent years fighting a stutter by talking in the mirror so he could actually get up in front of people and speak, and how he was, really ridiculed as a child for that. They don't know, his time, as a public defender and things of that nature that I think would be a very good story to tell. And the fact that he's got a very, very kind of familial story and that he cares very dearly about his family is something that would be very appealing to them. He just never told that story. I mean, this is a guy that's been in the Senate for years, so he hasn't had a competitive race for an extended period of time. And when you are the VP, you are the support role to the president. Now he's top of the ticket. Now he's the man, and people need to know who the man is.
Yeah. I think there's also, there's a demographic challenge there because the Latino population tends to be younger. Younger Americans have had more skepticism of Joe Biden in particular. They have, their views on economics in particular are more to the left than what Joe Biden has signaled. So I think there is a policy disconnect there as well. Colin, it's so great to see you. Welcome back.
Man.
Don't be a stranger.
Well, I won't be. Great to see you all again. Thank you.
Yep. Next on Rising, new polling shows some concerning signs for President Trump's re-election case. His campaign's director of strategic communications explains how they're responding when Rising returns.